Hi, Peter Charles here, Hooked for Life Fly Fishing. And today we're going to look at welding a loop onto some thick line. Now, this has a unique problem that if we try to weld a loop in thick line by folding it over, it ends up being way too thick a loop. It ends up very lumpy and it looks ugly and it won't go through the guides that smoothly because it's thick. So it creates a number of problems when we do that. So here's a way of creating a loop in thick line. And we might want to do this, for example, here I've created a sink tip system out of a regular floater. I've added loops at the 15-foot mark. We might have a shooting head that's too heavy, so we take a bit off the back, and now we have to make a new loop. Or we could have a full line and we want to turn it into a head system. Whatever the circumstances are, we're going to have to weld a loop onto thick line. So how do we go about doing that? Well, I've got my thick line here. I've got my heat shrink, and I have a piece of running line that I have cut, and it's about 4 inches long roughly. So I'm going to put the ends together, and I'm going to feed those ends into the heat shrink. And I'm going to push it all the way in, snug it in. So there we go. It's all the way in. There we go, it's all the way in. And if you get a little bit of unevenness at the end, it's not critical. So I've got it pushed all the way into the heat shrink. Now what I'm going to do is I've cut the end of the thick line at an angle. It helps to flow it, and it also helps for me to get it in the heat shrink. So I push it into the heat shrink, and I'll move it down close to the end. I'm just going to leave enough to form the loop. And now what I do is I push the running line on either side of the thick line. So what I'm going to do, end up going to have is the running line is going to be welded on either side. And this will move around a little bit. So what I will do is I'll snug the heat shrink down and keep a grip on it so it doesn't shift while I'm doing it. Okay, you can see now I've got it snug down and the running line is on either side of the main line. As usual, we'll start with the tag ends. And as soon as they've started to meld, you move on to the next batch. Keep working your way down. And this last bit here, we want that to really flow together. There we go. Now we have our loop, and I'm going to give this a minute to cool, and then we'll strip this off. Okay, there's our end loop, and you can make big loops when it's an end piece, like the end of a shooting head. If you're doing it for sink tip purposes, I'd make the loops a little smaller. You just get a little bit better turnover, because it becomes important if you're putting it at a sink tip end, much less important when it's at the back end. And you can see how the running line is welded onto either side of the main line, and we have our loop. And you can see how it has flowed together with the main line, so it gets a very smooth transition. So when you loop something onto this, you don't have a bump in there. It's very, very smooth. So you might want to put a little extra heat in the end just to flow that all together, which is what I did. But it's a very effective loop. When one of the companies I was with years ago, Guideline, the ends of the shooting heads, they were a custom cut shooting head. None of them came with loops, and they were always too long and too heavy. You had to trim them to make them right for your rod, and I would make these loops to put on the end. Never, ever, ever had a failure. 100% reliable. And I did a lot, and I did loops for other people as well, not just for myself. So I went through an awful lot of shooting heads where I put loops on the end, and they worked like a charm. So if you need to put a loop on the end of a shooting head that you've trimmed back, or you've turning a full line into a head system, or you're creating a sink tip system out of a floater, this is a great method to build the loops. So give it a try. Cheers.
Fish. Good one.